Welcome to this year's technical takeoff. I'm going to present Unleash Privilege on Windows with Microsoft Endpoint Privilege Management inside Intune. My name is Pia Larsen. I'm a senior product manager in the Intune team, working with our most strategic customers on how to adopt our products, including our EPM solution. Today, I would walk you through our EPM solution. First of all, the basic stuff. Then the policy and setup, how do you actually administrate it once you get it out, and some quick guides on how to adopt the product once you have the license inside your Intune environment. So first of all, we will go through the basic part of it. So we have some different components inside our EPM solution. We have onboarding policy, we have the rules, and then we have the client-side configuration. So the onboarding policy is where you can put your devices into the product. You can get them either onboarded in an audit mode, or you can do it with enforce mode. I will show you some of these policies later on. Our EPM solution is a part of the Intune suite or standalone offering. And later this year, it will also be included as part of our Microsoft 365 E5. It will have a seamless management inside our Intune portal. You find the configuration where you normally find your policy management. You will get a rich set of information back, either in audit mode, but also in managed mode. So we have our unmanaged elevation in audit mode, and we have our managed audit trail once we have the product in full enforce mode. So we have two ways from a client side how this works. We can either do application of binary detection. That is when one of your end user is launching an application. Then it will trigger the rule that is created to run automatically. Or we have elevation detection. That is when you right-click on something, and depending on the rules you have either for the specific apps or the default options, that is the behavior you will see. I will show you that in a minute. So the auto elevation trigger, that is when you just click on something and it elevates. Or if some process inside an application is triggering an executable, that will also trigger the elevation. Or you can use a selected run as elevated. So you basically right click on something and then you run with elevated access, and then it will go through our EPM workflow. We have our elevations actions that you can configure that as a default on your device, or you can do that based on individual rules. So the default one, we recommend you to device assign those so they apply to the entire device. We have the automatic, we have user confirmed, we have support approved, and we have deny. Deny is the most restrictive one. So if you are a company that cares very much about security and you don't want any elevation on your devices unless you have a rule for it, that is where you can use deny all. Most of our customers is adopting this with support approved as a backstop. So in case that you don't have a rule and your end user still wants or need to elevate something, then they can ask for permission, and our support approved workflow triggers inside our EPM agent. So they can ask for permission and an IT admin can approve that process to run elevated. So how do we actually configuring and setting up those policies? This is the way that we actually do the elevation. So depending on the matching rule, either the default elevation or the rule creation itself will kick in. So the default elevation, that is what you have for your entire device unless you have a rule configured. Once you have a rule configured, that could be for Visual Studio, it could be for PowerShell, it could be for your financial application that needs to run something elevated. We have these options to do automatic. We can use user confirmed. So the end user has to put in a business justification and or do authentication. They can also do support approved. So they need permission every time they need to elevate this application. And a new one that we implemented last year is elevate as current user. So in a rule, you can elevate as current user. I'll dig into that in a bit once we talk about how the default elevation actually works. Then you can also have deny rules. So let's say that you don't want your end user to be able to elevate CMD, then you can create a deny rule and they will never be able to elevate that. There's a big difference in our EPM solution from some of our competitors. So we only handle elevation. If you want to handle deny approve block inside a runtime, you need to leverage our application control for business solution. That is also built into Intune and managed inside Intune, but running natively on the Windows client side. So how do we actually elevate? So the EPM service is creating a virtual account that is isolated on the device. So everything is secure inside that elevation, unless you're using the new policy that we have the options for. All of the EPM will work if you're a standard user on your device, and then you do not normally have the right to elevate something. You can elevate with our EPM solution. If you are a local administrator on your device, EPM will not work, but it will be in an audit mode, so you can get backend logs into what your end user would have been elevated if they were a standard user. The elevation process that is known to EPM, we can control. So once you create your rules, you can allow your elevation to run only the binary that you create a rule for, or you can allow sub-processes. That includes every sub-process that is spun off by this executable that you allow it, or you can say that you're only allowed to run sub-processes there's another EPM rule for. So you can granularly configure based on the security setup that you need inside your environment. And then the usage data is going back into Intune. That will happen within the next 24 hours, and then you can see the logs and you can keep a track of what is actually happening in your environment over time. So what is the virtual account? It is basically the security boundary that we have created around our EPM solution. So it's automatically managed and it's completely transparent from the OS, but it also means when an end user is elevating something, they're elevating in a different user context than the one that they're signed into. So for example, they don't have access to the OneDrive, to the local files in the documents directory and so on, including settings that is configured in different files and registry values because it's being elevated as a different user. But it is the most secure way to actually elevate something, and it reduces the risk of lateral movement inside your environment. But due to this, there's also application where this is not super easy to actually elevate and get working. One of them is Visual Studio. So if you create an EPM rule where you elevate Visual Studio inside the virtual account, you install as an end user some extension. And the way that it works, it's first being installed once you actually close the Visual Studio application, and then you're out of the virtual account and it will not install. But if you allow it to elevate as current user, then it will still be in that user session once you close the application, and those extensions will actually work. So depending on your setup and what you're trying to elevate, we have different options for you. So most of your scenario will actually work. So how do we administrating EPM? First of all, we need to create a settings policy. That settings policy is the default behavior of EPM on your Windows client. The first one we do is we enable it, then we have the default elevation rule. As I mentioned earlier, the most restrictive one is deny all requests. So a standard user will not be able to elevate anything unless there's a rule on it. You can also set up to allow everything to elevate with user confirmation, but that means that every application can be elevated. The end user will just be asked for redo Windows authentication, or you put in a business justification. This is here where support approval is actually a good thing, because that is a backstop. Even if you don't have a rule for what the end user wants to elevate, then you will still get it inside Intune, and an IT admin can decide if that user is allowed to elevate it or not. If you put this one into not configured, that is the same as audit mode, and then you can deploy it to all your users if they are local admin today, or if they're running a third-party EPM product. And then you will see inside the EPM report what the user would have been elevating if they were running as a standard user on that device. So once you have onboarded your clients into our EPM solution, then you can create rules based on the report or based on the file attributes you already have. We have some mandatory things you need to fill out. One of them is rule name, so you can just create a rule name. Optional, you can put in a description as well. You need to set the elevation type. So how is the end user allowed to elevate this application? It could be user confirmed, whether we require Windows authentication or business justification. It could be automatic, so it's seamless for the end user. It could even be a deny rule if you don't want the user to be able to elevate this specific application. Support approved as a backstop. So when you use support approved in a rule instead of the backstop, then the end user do not have access to elevate this all the time. They need to ask for permission, and an IT admin can approve or deny it during the workflow. And then the new feature we got, elevate as current user, where you're elevating within your own user contact, your own user profile on the device. You can only use elevate as current user per rule basis and not as a default option on your device. So it's only per rule, but you can do it very granular. You can put in file name and file path, or you can use certificates. So that could be the publisher certificate. So let's say that you don't want to use file hashes for application that changes often. One of the files that we hear that changes often from the end user perspective is PowerShell. So if you're using the Microsoft Publisher Certificate and the file name for PowerShell.exe and allow that to run, then you can put in a minimum version that you're allowed to run. You can even put in argument support. So if you have an application and a rule with an argument support, it will allow you to elevate the application that you allow, and then you can allow or deny a argument list as well. In case you need to troubleshoot, we have some log location, and we have it in the event log as well. The best thing you can do if you're trying to troubleshoot this is use collect diagnostic within Intune on the devices. Then you will get all the logs for Intune, but also the EPM logs and the event log from that Windows device. It makes it way easier to actually troubleshoot. So let's go over how some of these features actually works. The first one is support approved for elevation. How does it actually work, and how does it help the end user and the IT admin? So support approved is a way where you can allow, in this case, this is the printer installer, where you allow that, but you're not allowing it all the time. So if an end user is asking permission to elevate the printer installer, then you can either allow or approve it based on a case-by-case basis, and the end user will get a notification in case that you actually approve this. One of the new features that we created last year based on customer feedback, it's super hard for customers to actually create rules, our EPM rules, based on file hashes and other attributes inside your environment. But straight in from the support approved report, we have the option to create rules with all the details. As you can see here in the screenshot, we have the file name, we have the publisher, and we even have the file path and some of the other attributes as well. So once we click on create the rule with these details, you get the option to either create a brand new policy or add this rule to an existing policy. And then you can set the type and you can set the child process behavior based on what you're trying to accomplish. If you do this within the support approved, you will get both the file hash and the certificates. If you create a rule from within the general report, you will only get the file hash. We are working to see if we can get the certificate in as part of our reporting. So you have the option to use both file hash and certificates from all our report, not only the support approved one we have inside Intune. So Elevate as current user, this is one of the things that we actually created last year. It's super important because it unlocks a lot of scenarios. Normally, when we talk to customers, about 95% of the use cases can be run in the virtual account, but we do see scenarios where it has to be elevated as current user, either to sign in to Entra, to gain access to OneDrive, gain access to files inside the local directory, such as the documents, and even some application have stored the settings inside the local registry Hive as a current user. So it's super easy to use this one. You just need to create it as Elevate as current user. You allow an executable, in this case, dvnv.exe, and allow that to install and run the Visual Studio within the current user context, as I said before. There's only one requirement when you use this rule. You need to have Windows authentication as the validation method. So you cannot combine this with automatic. It will always require Windows authentication. So you need to right click on it as an end user and go through the process as I showed before. Also, based on the feedback we get from customers, we have been creating argument support. Argument support is pretty good. So if you want to allow an application to run, but you don't want the end user to run it with all the arguments that is actually possible for that executable. One of them is if you want to change IP addresses, you can use netsa.exe, but you can allow it only to run with specific parameters and do not allow it to run with the rest. Another one is dsrec/cmd/status, but they're not allowed to leave the current status of the device. So this is pretty good in cases where you want to troubleshoot, but you don't want your end user to do something destructive on your end user. If it's an end user on IT support, it actually doesn't matter. As long as you have the rule assigned to the device, then everybody that is signing into that device will have this EPM rule. But the whole idea about having this one where you can do the executable itself, and then you can have the specific arguments, but not allow other arguments, it makes it very flexible and secure, as you can do and allow elevation precisely as you need and not elevating too much, but you are completely in control of what the administrator is allowed to elevate. So late last year, we added the EPM dashboard. The EPM dashboard gives you an overview. So we have a 48-hour snapshot where you can see all of your unmanaged elevation. You can see your user that has both managed and unmanaged elevation, and what users actually have managed elevation. So this is just the overview. If you scroll down, you can also see frequently unmanaged elevation. In this case and in this scenario, I don't have any support approved files, but they will also show up here. The same if you have put in rules for deny, you will also be able to see frequently denied elevation. So let's say that you are one of those customers that needs to be as secure as possible, and you have the default behavior of EPM set to deny all requests, then you will get the information in here. What is your end user actually trying to elevate over time? And you can have users where deny all works for a subset of your users. Then you can deploy the default elevation rule to those devices, and then you can have a different default elevation set to another set of users. So depending on the user personas you have inside your environment, you can also have different elevation rules. And of course, we have the trend elevation. So you can see this is from my demo environment. And even with a demo environment with a few users, there is still elevation ongoing on a daily basis, at least from an unmanaged perspective. But you will also be able to see your automatic and user confirmed as well. So based on all the communication we have had with our customers, the feedback that we have gotten, we have created a path to least privilege in the way that our customer normally do this, and what we actually recommend doing it. So first of all, we need to get EPM enabled. It has no impact on your end user. You can have elevation detection for local admins, including third-party products. And you can leverage the reporting inside our EPM solution to start understanding what kind of application do you need elevation inside your environment, so you can start creating rules for it. And that goes into step 2, actually building the rules. Once you start to building the rules, it still has no impact on the workflow unless you move elevation from unmanaged to managed. So having it from audit mode actually to go into enforce mode. You also need to consider, when you create rules, what needs to be in install time and what needs to be in runtime. So install time usually means that you can use our support approved as the backstop, where runtime is something that the end user needs to do all the time. So it's a good idea to have a rule for it, so the end user don't have to ask for permission every time they need to run something elevated. That brings us to step number 3. That is starting to remove your admin rights. This has a minimum user impact, but it still has a user impact because they cannot do what they were used to do, as they're no longer a local admin on their device. But if you have configured it as best practice with support approved as the backstop, that is the backup plan. Consider the impact of local user and groups. So if somebody is signing in locally on the device, that could be with a Windows Labs account, they are still a local admin and EPM will not apply to those. Within Intune, we have a policy under endpoint security and account protection. You can create a brand new policy for local users and groups. One of them is the administrator, and you can leverage the option to add, replace, and then you can decide who's actually going to be a member of that local admin group. So you can remove any members that are in there right now, and then you can decide who's going to be a member of that group. That could be the role inside Intra, the desktop administrator, and global admin. They're as default, but you can put them in again. Or you can use any other group if you need to have a subset of devices where a subset of support admins needs to have the local admin rights on those devices. You can still do it with this policy. So it's pretty flexible when you remove the local admin rights for your end user. And then over time, you need to keep to monitoring, iterating, and refining. One of the things inside the dashboard is that you can see what is being used over time, and rules that is not being used, you might consider removing inside your environment. Also, when application is getting a new certificate, you can update it inside the reusable settings, and then it will apply to all the rules that used to use that old certificate. You also need to identify more complex user scenarios. So the examples where your end users is elevating something and it do not work for them when they do it inside the virtual account, then you need to create a rule, and you can create a new rule where you're allowing the end user to elevate inside the current user context. And of course, you need to understand your return on investment. The more you actually use this and the more you use the reporting, the cheaper it will get for you to actually manage this over time. Creating the rules straight in from the reporting is the easiest way. Instead of going out manually collecting all of that metadata, the file hashes, the file executable itself, the hash values, and so on. So use the built-in reports where you can create a rule from there to lower the cost of implementing our EPM solution. So this is basically some tips and tricks that we have collected over time. So if you're migrating, no lift and shift. So our product is working differently, especially around the virtual account. We also see some customers is migrating from one product to our product. And the first one that they're testing is trying to elevate the browser on your device. Don't ever elevate your browser. If you're elevating your browser and allowing all the child processes to run elevated as well, everything that you download will be executed with local admin privileges. So our service is running with inside the virtual account. That is good for security, but for some apps, it's not super optimal. So you need to learn how that is working. And whenever it's working with the virtual account, use that as it's the most secure option. Also, minimize auto elevation rules. So in case that somebody is getting control over your device, that they are not allowed to actually elevate automatically, or something as bad as coming into your device, and that can elevate a process on your device that has an auto elevation rule. But auto elevation rules can be needed in some scenarios, but keep it to a minimum. Reduce the overhead by leveraging the certificate rules. So you don't have to change the rules every time a file is changing the hash value. And when we're talking about support approved, we are leveraging Windows push notification service to send the notification to the device that the IT admin has approved this one. We do see some customers is blocking VNS either in the network, in the firewall, in proxy servers, even in policies. So please ensure that you're not blocking VNS. And we do not support SSL inspection as well. The last point is, look at the logs. We shared the slide earlier. There's also a known issue list that we keep updating for either known issues, known limitation, or tips and tricks that we find in general that will actually help you once you implement EPM. So thank you for attending today on our session on EPM inside Intune. We really like your feedback. Please provide it to us. And thank you, and hope to see you next time.